Today, I'm answering 8 of the most common questions that you have asked me over the past 5 years about using Ableton Live on stage. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Behind the Spacebar. This is the podcast for folks that want to perform like a pro on stage with Ableton Live. If that's you, you're in the right place. If this is your first episode, welcome. My name is Will, and I am so glad you're here. And if you're a returning listener, then welcome back. So glad you're here. Today's episode is going to be a little different. This is going to be one that you're going to really want to study. Maybe bookmark, save this episode. I'm going to be running through 8 of the most common questions I've heard over the past 5 years as an Ableton Live Certified Trainer, since I started from studio to stage about 5 years ago. These are questions that keep coming up over and over. And I keep going, well, should I create more content? Well, I've already created content. Today's episode, the goal is to try to kind of be a quick start guide, if you will. A couple episodes ago, we did a quick start guide on how to get started with tracks, and that went really well and got some really good feedback. So my goal today is I'm going to answer these 8 questions in about 2 to 3 minutes, but then I'm going to provide some free resources. Every single one of these where you can dive further is completely free, where you can get a further answer to your question. Because if I try to answer all of these really in depth, I mean, this would be like an hour-and-a-half long episode, so I don't want to do that. I have a cup of tea to finish here, and that's more important than talking for an hour and a half. Now, before we get into these 8 most commonly asked questions that you'll be able to know the answer to by the end of this episode, and you'll be ahead of everyone else. Before I get to that, I want to let you know if you're interested in learning how to perform like a pro with Ableton Live on stage and do it the most efficient, flexible, stable way, then head to FromStudioToStage.com/subscribe and become a From Studio to Stage student. When you become a student and join the community, you get access to every single course that I have on the site, over 60 courses and counting. In fact, I'm working on content right now. If I showed my overhead camera right now, you would see I look like a crazy person. There is so much content coming this year. This is a big focus of mine. Updating older courses, adding brand new content. You get access to every template patch preset I've ever created is in the From Studio to Stage store, and you don't have to pay cash money for it because you can use your credits that you get every single month as being a From Studio to Stage community member and subscriber. Plus a monthly call every month where you can hop on a Zoom call with me and ask questions. It's the absolute best value, best way to learn to use Ableton Live to perform on stage. Listen, if you're looking to learn how to record with Ableton Live, produce music in Ableton Live, this is not for you. If you're looking to perform on stage with Ableton Live, there's not a single other place on the internet, in person, online, that you'll gain the amount of knowledge for the incredible value. Well, let's take value out of it. You're not going to get this knowledge anywhere else, and you're definitely not going to get it for this value. So from FromStudioToStage.com/subscribe, check that out. The other thing you could do, if you like this content, if you want to continue to see me create episodes of Behind the Spacebar and tutorials, if you're watching on YouTube, then subscribe, enable the bell icon. I want to make sure you don't miss out. Plus, it's just a free way that you can support the creation of this content. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, then consider hitting the subscribe or follow button. It's completely free to you. And again, it's just a way to support my efforts. And then finally, if you're watching on YouTube, consider commenting. I do my best. I try every day to go through as many comments as I can, and try to hit you back with a reply as quickly as possible. Yes, no, share a link. I do my absolute best to do that. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, then leave a rating and review. If you have nothing nice to say, then say nothing at all. But if you got something nice to say it often, and say more of it. Okay, let's get to number 1. And again, my goal with this episode is to answer these questions so that you have a step above everyone else, and you can go ahead and get further down the road than everyone else is. So number 1 question I get quite often is, what is the best fill in the blank? MIDI controller, audio interface, in-ears, all sorts of things, right? What's the best piece of gear to use on stage? And this is a difficult question to answer because context really matters. Now, what some people do, and I think this is a flawed approach, is some people go, my favorite artist is X, Coldplay. I don't know why they came to mind. I haven't listened to Coldplay in probably 5 years, but favorite artist is Coldplay. What does Coldplay use? I want to use everything Coldplay uses. Now, Coldplay is not Coldplay because they use this type of guitar, this type of in-ear, Ableton Live for tracks or whatever. Coldplay is Coldplay because they're Coldplay, right? But they just happen to use these things. That's one approach you can take. But what you want to look for is gear that is road tested, that's used by people, that's abused by people out on the road, that's gonna take a beating and is gonna keep working. Gear that is simple, gear that is custom made and built for this type of scenario, this type of world. And again, to try to make this easier for you, because we could spend an hour and a half talking just about gear on this podcast, and maybe we do a podcast where we just talk about gear. But to make this real easy for you, I've put together my gear guide of all my suggestions. I updated it for 2023. It is full of absolutely everything: audio interface, MIDI controllers, in-ears, hard drives, best interfaces for vocal processing, you name it, it's there, and it's going to be updated throughout the year. I've done it in a way this year that it's a living, breathing document, and so it's going to be easier than ever to update. And so to get that, all you have to do is head from studiotostage.com/gear. That's my gear guide, and it's going to give you access to everything. Because these are the two maybe most common things I hear. Well, what's the best MIDI controller for running tracks? Again, you'll get lots of options based on your context there, but the Oak Board Mini by Oaktone is my go-to, my number one suggestion for people asking. Best audio interface for running tracks, Play Audio 12 from iConnectivity, hands down. Nothing else even comes close to that. So that's question number one. Number two, ooh, this is a good one. Session view versus arrangement view. And this is a really nuanced question in some ways, in some senses. One, just asking, should I use session view or arrangement view on stage? Well, I got to learn more about your context. Context is super important here. In fact, I'm going to make a note to link to one of my favorite episodes we've done on the podcast here, but the importance of context. And for me as a trainer, something I'm trying to get a little better at is when people reach out and they say, Will, I need help with this, I'm trying to do this, is really learning the context in which they're working. That's super important. But let's talk context for a second. If you're stepping on stage in a linear type of performance environment, if you're a band on stage playing songs, 99.9% of the time you're in a linear performance. Now I need to find a better way to describe this, because people hear linear and they typically just think like we're on rails, we're stuck. I don't mean that. I mean, you step on stage and play a song. Yes, you may decide to repeat a chorus. You may decide to loop an intro. That is still a linear thing because there is a song structure. If you're stepping on stage playing a song with a song structure, that's a linear nature. And if you're using backing tracks, using click, that's typically something done in a linear fashion. Linear doesn't mean we can't repeat, just means we have a song structure and an arrangement. 99.9% of the time, if you're doing that, you should be using arrangement view. Now, if you're in a non-linear environment, meaning you're stepping on stage, you're just gonna play a section and play a section and play a section as long as you want to, loop it almost in like a jam band type thing, a live looping type scenario, and then you wanna bring in another thing and you're launching clips and you want things to play non-linear and a lot of different timelines to play at once, then session view is the way you should use, the way you should go. So it all depends on context. I just did a video, I think a week ago, where I took a song in Ableton Live and I said, here's how we format the song in session view, here's how we format this song in arrangement view. Because this is a subject I've talked about for many, many years, even before I started from studio to stage, back at my very first company, Loops and Worship. And I was a session view devotee, and I built a master set in session view and ran tracks. And I was very stubborn, very closed-minded, and I never tried using arrangement view. And then one day, based on a suggestion of a friend at the time, I tried arrangement view and I realized, wow, this view was actually made for linear things and for running tracks, and it saved me so much time. So if you don't believe me, don't take my word for it. Like, seriously, do not. Click the link in the description of this video, watch my session view versus arrangement view video. Plus, I'll link to my building a live set in less than 5 minutes video where I show you with my actual process how quickly and easily you can build an Ableton Live set. And even if you're considering using a Ableton Live set to do like a master set, I think we've got a video on that I'll link to as well. But tons of resources there. So the quick rule of thumb here, if you're doing a live looping type scenario, non-linear performance session view, if you're doing a linear performance playing with a band using backing tracks, or click arrangement view. And again, do not take my word for it. Check the videos out where I show you, you'll see it exactly happen, and then try it yourself and make your decision based on that, not based on what some dummy on a podcast or a video says. And I want to add one caveat there, then we'll get to number 3. I'm going longer on these than I should. Sometimes people, I'll share that info with them and they'll go, yeah, but I'm an electronic music artist. And I'll go, okay, are you doing a linear performance or non-linear? And sometimes it is like a live looping DJ, they're firing clips, but a lot of times they're doing a linear thing, a planned song. They're maybe a producer. They want to do a set that of songs they've produced. It's electronic music. And for some reason, they get hung up on arrangement view because they feel like if I'm an electronic musician, I have to use session view and I have to make a really complicated, hard thing. And I have to step on stage and do something that's hard and complex. Otherwise, no one's going to care. That's simply not true. If it's linear, arrangement view. If it's nonlinear, session view. Okay, number 3, this is a big one, and I've got a great answer for you. Number 3, how to become an Ableton Live trainer. This is called Ableton Live Certification Program. You can become an Ableton Live Certified Trainer. I've been an Ableton Live Certified Trainer, I think since, I can never remember. It's either 2011 or 2010. It was before my kids were born, and they were born in 2012. But I've been an Ableton Live Certified Trainer for a very long time, however you look at that. And it's probably one of the best decisions I've made, definitely in my career. The connections I've made through that, the credibility I got because of the certification has just been amazing. Now, I did a full deep dive into how to become an Ableton Live Certified Trainer. Plus, I talk about what certification is and isn't in one of our first episodes. It may actually be the first episode. No, the first episode of the podcast is RTFM. So it's not that, but it's one of the first like 5 episodes of this podcast that you're listening to. It's like a deep dive into what is certification, should you consider it, is it for you? So I'll link that in the show notes. But in short, things I always mention to people, certification is not a way to learn Ableton Live. It is not a program where you show up for a weekend, you learn about Ableton Live, take a test. So if you're looking for a way to learn Ableton Live, from studiotostage.com/subscribe. Plus, I don't know if it'll be out by the time this episode releases, but as soon as it's out, I have an article that I will link to that's a kind of in-depth process of this that announces some other ways that From Studio to Stage will fill in the gaps there. So if you're looking to learn Ableton Live, certification is not for you. If you already know Ableton Live, you've used it for many years, you understand different context in which Ableton can be used. Not to pick on my church friends, but I hear from a lot of church friends that are like, hey, I want to become a certified trainer. Okay, why? And I'll say, well, if you want to learn, it's not, no, it's not that I want to learn. I've mastered using Ableton Live. Oh, cool. How long do you use it? 3 months. Oh, cool. So you're like producing music, recording? No. I just use it for tracks on stage with my worship band. Okay, cool. What if a DJ comes to you and asks how to use Ableton Live? Well, I'm going to be a certified trainer. I'm not going to talk to them. Certification is all about your knowledge of Ableton, your ability to communicate that knowledge clearly and teach people from a diverse set of musical backgrounds and experiences. You don't have to be a DJ to teach a DJ how to use Ableton Live to DJ. You'll know the bits and the pieces, right? You can find all that in the manual, and then you just experiment and use it, right? Comes down to knowing when to use session and arrangement view, for example. But it's, again, certification is not a way to learn Ableton Live. It's a way to get a certification, a piece of paper, if you will, that says this person knows what they're talking about. We certify their teaching ability, their knowledge of Ableton Live. And it's really a great way. If you're going to be a teacher, you should definitely do it. If you're going to be a consultant of some type, maybe consider doing that. But again, I'll link in the show notes to that full episode where you can dive deep. Plus, I'll share some other ways if you're looking for, hey, I want to learn Ableton Live really well and get some sort of badge, certificate saying I know it, then got some really good ways where you can do that. Links in the show notes. Number 4, this is pretty specific to Ableton. And if you don't understand the setup here, then that's fine. Just watch the video. I can't use my MIDI controller and my stop track at the same time. The heart of this question is I have taught people for many, many years, way beyond From Studio to Stage years, of how to create something called a stop track. And that's a really poor term because it's actually a little MIDI clip that's assigned to the stop button in Ableton Live. And when you get to the end of your song, it stops. And you stop it using a virtual MIDI driver, which is either the IAC driver on a Mac, Loop BE1 on a PC, and basically it gets to that clip and it's assigned to stop and it stops Ableton Live. The next question people get, and I'll link to the video showing how to set that up. It's kind of step 1. Step 2, the next question I get is, yeah, well, but I have a MIDI controller, and on my MIDI controller, there's a stop button. And when I assign my stop button to stop in Ableton, my stop clip doesn't work. And when I assign my stop clip to Ableton Live, my MIDI controller doesn't work. It all comes down to understanding how Ableton treats MIDI. And I cannot have 2 different MIDI notes, 2 different MIDI commands assigned to the same function in Ableton Live. But I can have multiple devices sending the same MIDI note, MIDI channel, MIDI CC, whatever it is, MIDI channel to one thing in Ableton. So all you do, and I've got a detailed tutorial showing exactly how to solve this, all you do is make sure that stop note, that MIDI clip, and that MIDI controller send the same MIDI note, MIDI message, maybe MIDI note, MIDI CC, and the same MIDI channel. Now you're gonna hear that and you're gonna say, yeah, well, but my SPD still doesn't work. It's because you missed that second piece, MIDI channel. Same MIDI message, either note or CC, and MIDI channel. And when you do that, that's gonna work. And that gets to a fundamental bit of Ableton Live knowledge, which again is that two multiple devices sending multiple MIDI notes, MIDI channels cannot control one thing in Ableton Live, but you can have multiple devices, multiple things that are all sending the same MIDI channel, MIDI note, or MIDI CC, and assign one of those once and all of them will work. I almost shared a paid resource, but I'm not going to do that. But it's a course on From Studio to Stage that helps you understand just the basics of how MIDI works in Ableton Live, which would be super helpful. But again, check out the link in the description and the show notes for that. Okay, number 5. I'm going to hit this one in just a second. But before I do, just a quick reminder, if you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and enable the bell icon. Again, it's just a free way to say thanks to, most importantly though, more important than telling me thanks, is making sure you get access to this content as soon as it's available, as soon as it's out. And if you hit the little notification icon, you'll be notified on your phone. What I tell people all the time is if the title looks interesting, if the thumbnail looks interesting, click through. If not, just ignore it and it'll get to you somehow. If you're meant to see it, you'll see it. I'm not super stressed if you don't see every single one of my videos. When it's the right time for you to see it and find it, you will find it. But if you enjoy this, consider subscribing. And then again, just again, as a reminder, if you want to become a From Studio to Stage subscriber, community member, then head to fromstudiotostage.com/subscribe. That'll get you access to everything I do. The goal of that is to make it feel like one-on-one tutoring. I'm coaching you through how to use Ableton Live for your performance, whether you're an artist, whether you're a live looping artist, whether you're a worship leader, whether you're a cover band, a band out on the road, whatever your scenario is, there's content for you there. Okay, number 5, what version of Ableton Live should I buy? Again, context is everything, so let me hit you really quickly. And I've got, again, some free resources, tutorials I'll link to here, plus my gear guide. Number 1, if you're just getting started with Ableton Live, get Ableton Live Lite, which is going to be with a product that you've purchased, a MIDI controller or audio interface. If not, then look at Ableton Live Intro. It's the cheapest, most affordable way to get started to figure out if this is for you. I hear from people, not all the time, but I hear from people on the YouTube that'll comment and say, God, this is the worst god-awful interface I've ever seen. And I go, cool, well, don't use it. Like, that's fine. You know, I hate MainStage. I can't stand to look at MainStage. I hate Pro Tools. I hate the way Pro Tools looks, basically everything about it. But if you want to use it and that's your thing, great, fantastic. But I would rather you figure that out after spending like 75 bucks than spending $1,000. But if you're going to use tracks in Ableton Live, you need Ableton Live Standard. I'll get people occasionally reach out and say, hey, I want to use Ableton Live for tracks, but I don't want to spend the money on Standard. And I always tell them, you can get started in Intro when it comes to using Ableton for backing tracks, but you are going to hit limitations really quickly with track limit. Standard is the way to go. Ableton Suite is the way to go if you want to use some set list management things that require Max for Live, if you want to use Ableton's built-in sounds. But for, you know, I would say 90% of the audience watching, listening to this, Ableton Live Standard is where you need to be. If you click the link in the description of this, you can purchase Ableton Live Standard and support my efforts as a content creator and as an Ableton Live Certified Trainer. Costs you nothing extra and you purchase directly through Ableton, which is a great way to do that. Plus, side note, if you become a From Studio to Stage student, then you can purchase Ableton at the EDU discount and save tons and tons of money. So from studiostage.com/subscribe, and that's where you'll find the path on how to get Ableton into discount. Okay, number 6. Again, this is a highly specific question. I'll give some context here. How do I get Ableton sessions to sync? How do I get Ableton sessions to sync? A lot of times people reach out because they see maybe my content on the Play Audio 12. They want to create a redundant rig. And one of the first questions people get is, hey, I don't want to set up my session to where I press play on my MIDI control and it starts both machines. I want my backup machine synced to my A machine so that it's perfect and everything's perfectly in time. I hear this once, twice a month, always typically from people that are just getting started, creating a redundant rig, or maybe they're coming from something like DP or Pro Tools that they used live for tracks and that's how they did it there. They want to learn how to do it in Ableton Live. Because of the way Ableton Live works, a couple things up front. One, Ableton has an inherent, not bug, but if you try to sync two sessions and you get past measure 1025, your second Ableton Live session will automatically stop. Check out the link in the description, the show notes, where I show you exactly how to solve that. I'm getting that question more often than not, and I think that's because most people start with the redundant thing and think this is the right way to go. I'm getting that like once or twice a month now, which I never had gotten that question until about a year ago. I think it was Josh. I think Joshua was the first person that reached out. Shout out to Josh if you're listening. Can't remember your last name right now. But when you're syncing Ableton Live, there's this issue with measure 1025, which happens to do with MIDI numbers, hexadecimal numbers, whatever. It's a bigger issue for smart people. Show you exactly why that happens, how to solve it in that video. 2, Ableton doesn't have what's called FreeSync right now, or the ability to, if this computer goes down and you're synced using timecode, then this computer will stop as well too. So if you're using timecode, which side note, Ableton cannot sync via LTC, only MTC. If you don't know what that means, skip past this portion of the podcast, skip ahead about 30 seconds. Then join me back. But Ableton can only sync via MTC, not LTC. There's a multitude of methods and ways to convert LTC to MTC, but it's for another day, another podcast. But it can only sync via MTC. The downside though is right now, syncing via MTC, if this computer stops, this computer does not keep running. There was an update to Ableton around 11.2, some beta release or whatever, where I think they're trying to improve that to where eventually it will kind of do that like free sync thing that most MTC timecode based things do, which is if this goes down, this one will keep going. So until they get that feature, and even when they do get that feature, I don't very much need that feature because I just use my MIDI controller plugged into my Play Audio 12. I press play, and that sends that signal to both computers, and both computers play at the same time. Random side note, have the same exact type of computer, hard drives and everything. Don't use like a new computer and a really old computer because you're not really doing redundancy there. You're just kind of playing with fire and hoping things work out. Have both computers be plenty powerful, as much as possible, the same exact specs and everything, so that stuff stays perfectly in sync. Okay, number 7, this is a good one. Why does Ableton keep crashing? This is something I hear on YouTube, and it typically goes a little more like this. Man, the new update to Ableton is so stupid because every time I open it, it does this or it instantly crashes. They're idiots. They don't know what they're doing. And that's those scenarios where I kind of step back. This is just me personally. You live your life the way you want to live your life. But for me, when I get into scenarios like that, right now I'm testing a product, a brand new product from a company. And the software with this product is not loading on my computer. Now I could look at this and I could say, this company's idiots. They cannot make software to save their lives. Or I could look back and go, maybe it's something about my setup, some unique thing about my setup. If I assume I'm wrong here, then maybe there's a little better way to go about this. So why does Ableton keep crashing? This is less of me answering that question and more of giving you a method and a pathway of how to go forward when you're having issues with Ableton Live. Ableton is a fantastic company with fantastic developers who know what they're doing. They know how to develop products, they know how to release products, to beta test products, but they cannot test it's impossible. There's no software developer, hardware developer, no matter how big they are, Apple, Samsung, Google, whoever it is, that can test every possible scenario with every possible piece of hardware around to release hardware and software that's 100% bug-free. It just does not exist. We live in a world where there are imperfections. It does not exist. But when Ableton releases a piece of software, they have gone through enough automated and non-automated, like individual testing things with a group of beta testers to say, we believe this software is as bug-free as we could possibly make it, and the updates that we've added are worth updating and asking you to update. So they release their software. If you run into an issue, please do not go to YouTube to look for the answer. I know it's ironic because I make content for YouTube. I am not a YouTuber though. Someone the other day made a comment about YouTubers. I'm not a YouTuber. I'm someone who makes content for YouTube. But 2, don't go to YouTube looking for the answer, okay? Number 2, the first thing you should do is support@ableton.com. And people, I've reached out and people have said, oh, Ableton, blah, blah, blah. And I'll say, well, reach out to support. Well, they don't have a phone line. They will, okay, well, either sit there with your arms crossed and be pissed that they don't have a phone line, which God bless them, I'm so glad they don't, or just email support@ableton.com. If you don't hear back within 24 hours, they either did not get your ticket or it's in your spam folder. They're not ghosting you. Support@ableton.com. They have ways of getting bug reports from Ableton that only they have the tools and ability to read, that a YouTuber does not have the ability to. Your buddy down the street who used Ableton 6 years ago doesn't have access to that. So please, 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 if Ableton keeps crashing, one, assume it's maybe you. Immediately reach out to Ableton, support@ableton.com. It's fine to look on the internet, on YouTube. For folks that are part of the From Studio to Stage community, I tell them often, hey, post in our community, ask other fellow community members, are they having the same issue? Maybe that'll give you some confirmation. Maybe someone will find an answer, or they heard back from Ableton before you did and they can pass the knowledge along to you. But start reaching out, start making efforts. I'll hear from people that will live for years with weird quirks and bugs because they never updated their Ableton version and they just believe this is the way it is. Ableton doesn't, as a company, doesn't create software with the goal of pissing you off or making your life harder. There's something specific about your scenario that's just not working. So if you run into issues, support@ableton.com. Sure, Google it. You'll probably find a video I did, an article I did that says, here's how to fix it. Try that. If it works, great. If not, don't comment on the YouTube video and ask that person to solve your problem for you. And you can always like book a coaching session with me or with a certified trainer or someone, but before you pay anything, support@ableton.com. Okay, my last question, I've saved it to the end because only about 30% of you does this really apply to, but that is, should I use Playback, Prime, or Ableton Live? If you're a worship leader, if you're a church musician, then this applies to you. First thing up front, if you're not gonna use tracks in a church context, then do not use Playback or Prime. These are closed ecosystems created for churches to do church music. They are really great, incredible resources, but they're closed ecosystems. They're not made for bands looking to run backing tracks. I know there's some other apps out there, and I would love to dive deep and explore some of those that are iPad, iPhone based, that are just, you know, upload content from anywhere into them. These apps are not that. That's not what they're made for. So if you're not a worship leader, if you're not using tracks in a church setting, do not choose Playback or Prime. It's a foolish decision if you do. But if you are a worship leader, it's a real serious question because both of these apps have developed. They're very mature. I would argue in a lot of ways they are a little too mature and they need to step back and go back to the simplicity in which they were first, the goal of simplicity when they first were developed. And I've talked about that a lot publicly. But I've got so much content where I lay out and do over an hour-long shootout between Playback, Prime, and Ableton Live. I look at every single feature, stack it up to Ableton Live. We compare cost. I have some specific videos where I shoot out Playback versus Ableton, Prime versus Ableton. Check all that out. Do not take my word for it, right? I worked for multitracks.com for 5 years. Playback was my baby and led the team and designed a lot of the features that are currently in that app, and I'm super proud of that. But if I step back from as unbiased as I can possibly be perspective, here's my couple really quick thoughts in 2 to 3 minutes. Number one, if you're just getting started as a worship leader, Playback or Prime. And I've said this till I'm blue in the face, but choose Playback or Prime. Well, which one of those should I choose? Well, one, go to multitracks.app, and that's a free quiz I've put together where I'm going to ask you some specific questions, and based on the answers to those questions, I'm going to tell you exactly what app you should use, Playback, Prime, or Ableton Live. But to decide between these two apps, it comes down to where do you get your content from. Again, what's the keyword here? Ecosystem. Even more important keyword, closed ecosystem. If you use and purchase content from Loop Community, use Prime. If you purchase content from Multitracks, use Playback. These apps, these companies will reward you if you stay in their ecosystem. You know, you're going to see all your songs directly in the app. You can download them. You can edit songs pretty easily, edit your set list, that sort of stuff. But you start to pay the tax when you leave the ecosystem. If you use Playback and you want to use content from Loop Community, or you use Prime and you want to use content from Multitracks, you're going to pay the tax. What's the tax? Well, you have to go purchase the thing from the other company. You have to upload it to that company's cloud. You have to wait for the cloud to process it. You have to then go do all the work to add in your markers, your tempo changes, your time signature changes, if the company even allows you to do that that to then get it in your app and to have a second-class citizen type experience, right? That content will never be as nice as the content you downloaded from those companies. And you're gonna spend way more time doing that in those apps than you would in Ableton Live. So if you're just getting started, Playback or Prime, depends on where you buy your content. If you're willing to stay in that ecosystem, if tracks is really not your thing, you just don't care about it, then just stick in one of those ecosystems. Maybe consider multi-tracks that may win out. In the end, you can look at the price comparison there. Multi-tracks is cheaper than Loop Community in the end. I know Elsie's app is completely free. Playback has the intro tier, which is completely free. But when you look at kind of like the tiers that you need to do things similar to Ableton, multi-tracks is cheaper by a couple cents. Like, it's not a whole lot. But when you compare all three, you'll see that Ableton Live in the long run is actually cheaper. You don't get content with it, but it's actually cheaper in the end. All that, again, don't listen to me, fact check me, check my videos, check the Google Sheet where I put together all that data and research. That's yours to access for free. This is me trying to be as unbiased as possible. But I think if you just don't really care much about tracks, stick with one of those, maybe consider multi-tracks, because you can pay, it's gonna cost you, it can get quite expensive, but you can get a service that's gonna allow you to sync your charts with Ableton, with Playback rather. It's gonna allow you to get files you can load in ProPresenter that's gonna save you time, but you're gonna pay a lot for that, and as soon as you cut off those services, you lose access to that, right? As soon as you cut off those services, you no longer can download more ProPresenter files. You can't do the cool sync stuff, and it only works in that app. As opposed to Ableton, which is an open ecosystem, and gives you far more flexibility to edit and customize. So all of those videos, I've laid out so much stuff, but I would say in the end, if you're looking for the app that's an open ecosystem, lets you make edits like, exactly edit transitions between songs, to edit song sections and add transitions between song sections instead of just seeing everything as a block, to straighten out the tempo of something. If you download a song from an artist where they decided to have tempo variations in it and there's no reason for that, then you can straighten out the tempo for that. Again, you can easily use content from any one of those sources, format your song in less than 5 minutes, which is far faster than either of those apps will ever be. And plus you get a desktop app. Yes, I know Prime, Playback are available on desktop, but I would not consider them desktop apps. They are touch first apps that have been brought to the desktop, and there's some weird quirks within that. Try adding MIDI cues in either of those apps and tell me they're faster than Ableton. And then you can build a set in Ableton Live in less than 5 minutes. And again, I've got content showing you how to do all of that, but check out those resources, right? My goal is to try to go as in-depth, to share my data. And in fact, something I've highly considered doing is creating a Playback and Prime course, just so I can say I really truly am unbiased. Because right now you could say, yeah, but Will, you sell a site dedicated to teaching people how to use Ableton. Of course you're gonna say Ableton is better. Well, I don't say it's better for everyone. I don't say it's better in every scenario. I talk about it being an open ecosystem, but I've thought, well, maybe I should do a Playback and Prime course just to say, literally, I have no bias in this whatsoever. You can subscribe and just take my Playback course or Prime course. If you're interested in that, let me know. That'd be really easy to do. And honestly, those apps have gotten so mature, again, I would argue maybe a little too mature, that I think in a lot of cases you need a course to understand every feature of those apps. But that's neither here nor there. Okay, so there's our 8 questions. If there's something I didn't get to in this episode that you go, Will, how about this? Could you answer this one? This is one I run into, or I've talked to some friends and they have the same question. Leave a comment, let me know. I'll do my best to answer it. Thanks so much for watching. Again, consider hitting the subscribe button, enable the bell icon so you see exactly when I go live, you don't miss out on anything. And if you want to join the From Studio Stage community, then FromStudioStage.com/subscribe. Thanks so much for watching. Appreciate every single one of you. Thanks for being a part of the community, and we'll talk soon. Take care, everybody. Bye.